Good evening, everyone, and welcome. My name is Brian Bailey, and I use he, him pronouns, and I have the privilege of serving as the chair of the Howard County LGBTQIA Commission. I am truly delighted to welcome you to tonight's webinar, Building a Holiday Toolkit. We have some incredible guests joining us this evening from both Johns Hopkins Medicine and the University of Maryland School of Social Work. But first, for those who may not be familiar with the commission, we were established in the fall of 2022 by our county executive, Calvin Ball, and our county council as a permanent body dedicated to advancing equity, inclusion, understanding, and respect for all gender and sexual identities. Our mission is to drive meaningful policy and systemic change to support individuals who identify as lesbian, gay, bisexual, transgender, queer, non-binary, and all those along the LGBTQIA+ spectrum. The commission consists of up to 19 voting members and 2 non-voting student members, and we meet bi-monthly on the second Tuesday at 6:30 p.m. in Columbia. If you'd like to learn more about our meetings or our work, I encourage you to visit us at www.howardcountymd.gov/LGBTQIA. Now, for the reason we're here. We know that the holiday season can be a challenging time for many in our community, navigating relationships, gatherings, and even deciding whether and how to engage with people who may not be affirming in our lives. But I want you to know you're not alone. Tonight's webinar was designed for you to provide expert guidance and some practical strategies for approaching the holidays with intention and care. And for the allies joining us, you'll hear helpful tips on how you can offer meaningful support to your LGBTQIA+ friends, family, and loved ones during this holiday season. Our guests this evening are Shakina Davis, who uses she, her pronouns. Shakina is a DEI training specialist at the University of Maryland School of Social Work. She develops and delivers training programs focused on cultural competency and inclusive leadership, collaborating with stakeholders to foster a culture of inclusion. Fluent in English and Spanish, Shakina has extensive experience working on DEI initiatives in both national and international settings, including community development in Ecuador and child welfare in the US. She holds a Master's of Arts in Intercultural Communication from UMBC, Go Retrievers, and a BA in Photojournalism from George Fox University. Our second presenter this evening, is Paula Nira, who uses she, her pronouns. Paula has a law degree, a Master's of Nursing, is a registered nurse, is a certified emergency nurse, and is a fellow of the American Academy of Nursing, while also being a Navy veteran, a nurse, and an attorney. She's been a leader in advancing LGBTQ+ inclusion in the US Armed Forces, and is an international expert in transgender and gender-expansive healthcare policy and care delivery. She currently serves as the Program Director for LGBTQ Equity and Education at Johns Hopkins Medicine, Office of Diversity, Inclusion, and Health Equity. Thank you all for being here, for showing up, and for helping us build a stronger, more supportive, and affirming community here in Howard County. And with that, let's get started. I'll turn it over to our presenters.
Excellent. Thank you so much for having me. It's truly an honor to be here with you all and to kind of just have a really important conversation. And so thank you again for having me here. I guess we can dive right in. So surviving the holidays, tips and resources for LGBTQ+ folks and their families. We can go to the next slide. So as many of you know and have probably experienced, the holidays can be a time of connection and celebration and happiness and joy, but they also come with some challenges, especially for LGBTQ+ individuals. And so whether you're navigating difficult family dynamics and trying to decide how to go about having those hard conversations and interactions, whether you're feeling excluded from traditions and trying to figure out how to navigate that, whether you're managing safety concerns with your family and loved ones. All of these situations can really make this season stressful. And so hopefully we can kind of talk together about some different ways to address them. We can go deeper into what does it look like to really think critically about these things. So as I mentioned, the first thing is family dynamics and potential conflict with family, feeling excluded or misunderstood, being told that you can't participate in certain activities because of your identity. The third is just stress from heteronormative traditions, right? Traditions that don't include you, that are binary in their perspective and structure. And then finally, safety concerns for those who don't have the support and the environments that they need to be supported in. So those are kind of some of the things that we're going to be discussing today and hopefully finding strategies for and some tips for. We can go to the next slide. So the first step is being able to communicate your boundaries, really figuring out before the events, before the gatherings, right? What are your needs? How can you speak them clearly and respectfully, but still directly? It's really one of the most important steps that you can take. Letting your family know, letting your friends know ahead of time, okay, what are the topics that are okay? What are the topics that really are off limits, right? And then having a few prepared phrases that you can use to kind of help steer the conversations into a more comfortable direction, right? And so perhaps you use phrases like, hey, you know what? I'm not really comfortable discussing this at this time. Or this doesn't feel like the appropriate space to kind of embark on this conversation or this topic. Can we maybe discuss this at a later time? Can we find a time to discuss it one-on-one together, right? And so having these phrases, even if it's written down on your phone or written down on a notepad, just to kind of be proactive about these conversations. And then a simple one is like, let's just change the subject, right? Either asking for that directly, I need to change the subject, or finding a clever way to change the subject and kind of bring things back to community and unity and commonalities. We can go to the next slide. Thank you. The next big tip is creating a support network. Building a support network can really make a big difference. Whether it's someone in the room or a friend that you can text while you're at these family gatherings, having allies you can trust really will make you feel more secure. Virtual connections can also be a lifeline if you're in a less than supportive environment. And so if they aren't in the room with you, and if you aren't able to take a friend along to some of these gatherings or events, just having someone you can text or chat, or maybe step outside and have a conversation with that can kind of help navigate some of these difficult situations. And so I would challenge you to write these things down too. Who are some supportive family members or friends that you can really rely on, or that you can kind of nudge under the table when you need support in either changing the subject or asking for a change in environment. What are code words you can use, right? Or, hey, would you mind if we checked in halfway through the night? I'm not sure, how this is going to go or how I'm going to be feeling. If I say, let's go get dessert, can that be our code word so that we can check in with one another? You can check in with me. And then finally, the virtual facet that I mentioned, having support groups, not just someone you can text, but having support groups and affirming people that you can kind of connect with either before family gatherings, before the big holidays, and or after. And so finding those resources and those links, really the key is being proactive and creating that support network. And we can go to the next slide. Another strategy is prioritizing self-care. Sometimes things happen and then in the aftermath we go, okay, now I need to take care of myself. But how can you really be mindful about these techniques prior to entering into these spaces? Your well-being is priority. And so taking breaks when you need them and thinking about the moments that would be good to take breaks, whether that's stepping outside for some fresh air, whether it's finding a quiet moment alone and just letting people around you know, like, hey, if I need to step aside or if I grab my book, like, I'm okay, but this is what's going on. Just having familiar, comforting items with you can also help. I have ADHD pretty bad, and so like having fidget toys and like things that I can play with my hands can really ease anxiety and stress for me. And so having those with me and carrying those to difficult conversations or family gatherings that, might be difficult. Just to kind of self-disclose a little bit, my family is not exactly supportive of queerness, of my queerness, of the LGBTQIA plus community. And so for me, it helps to be able to have kind of these self-care things planned out in advance. And to be able to say, I need to step away for a second, or I need to change the subject. So just having these mindfulness techniques can really ease stress in situations. So again, scheduling breaks for yourself, bringing items that make you feel safe and comfortable, and then practicing mindfulness, like deep breathing and grounding. We can go to the next slide. This is one of my favorites. Part of my kind of background is intercultural communication and understanding traditions across cultures and how people communicate across cultures. And so I love the idea of just creating new traditions and creating new forms of communicating. And so for those who, may not find a lot of joy in these kind of traditional gatherings, it's amazing to be able to create your own traditions, and it can be really empowering to do so. Being able to celebrate with your chosen family, being able to organize events with your own event planning and your own favorite things and activities, and just being able to spend time doing things that bring you happiness, that bring you happiness. There's something really special about being able to kind of curate your own space and decide what feels safe and what feels good in these times and in these holidays. And so hosting your own inclusive gatherings, inviting the people that support you, and participating in events that bring you joy and that affirm you and your identity. Next slide. So got a resource page here, just with some different resources that you can use to find the support that you need. I'm not sure if the slide is going to be shared after this. I'm perfectly fine if it is. And so these links should be clickable, but if not, I'll give you my contact information here. And you can reach out and I can share the slide with you. But the Trevor Project is a 24/7 crisis hotline that you can reach out to. There's a trans lifeline as well that provides support for transgender individuals. And then there's the LGBTQ plus National Help Center. And those are some great resources. There are many, many resources, many more than are listed here, of course, if you need support during the holidays. And so I'm happy to do some additional research and provide you with some organizations that can help and some resources that can help. Next slide. And then there's some resources for families as well, for families looking to better support LGBTQ plus loved ones. These resources can provide you with education and community and practical tools, really just encouraging you to make the holidays more positive for everyone. And so again, take a screenshot, or I'm happy to share after these resources that are here. I do want to make one quick note just about culture in general. For some of us coming from other cultures and other countries and speaking other languages, maybe some of these tips don't really resonate with you. Maybe your strategy is more assimilating or needing to be okay with your family's perspective because of your religious background or your cultural ideologies. And so I do want to make space for that too, just to say it's not a one size fits all. And so definitely reach out if you need specific resources around, and you can go to the next slide actually with my contact. But definitely reach out if you want some culture specific, how do I communicate with my Dominican family? How do I engage kind of on more of an intercultural level? And I'm happy to have that conversation as well. Thank you all for having me. That's pretty much my presentation. And so I'd love to kind of open up for some questions. I know we said we are going to leave questions to the end. And so if our facilitators and hosts can help me with kind of the question part, that would be awesome, and we can engage with one another. I'm looking at the chat here. I'm not seeing no questions. Okay. Yeah, so just really quickly, a little bit more about kind of me and my background at the Office of Diversity, Equity, Inclusion here at UMB. My area is particularly around training data and programming, but my specialty is kind of that intercultural lens that I spoke about before. So it's understanding how different cultures speak, right? So in some cultures, you have kind of more of a high context culture. Oh, there's a question. Awesome. I'll address that in just a sec. So in some cultures, you have more of a high context where it's more storytelling, and you need that kind of storytelling to really engage with family and friends. In the US, it's more of a low context communication style. And so we get right to the point. We're very direct with the way that we speak. And so depending on what culture you come from, that really impacts how you navigate conversations. And so that's something that you would want to consider, of course. Who is your family? What kind of communication style do you use to interact? All right, so let's see here. how do you deal with family that doesn't accept you, and LGBTQ? So, as mentioned before, there is no kind of one size fits all, right? For me personally, um, I choose to simply not engage and to kind of keep that part of my identity to myself. Um, because for me, I've learned that not everyone is worthy of your story and not everyone is worthy of your experience. And so I can have a meaningful relationship with my family without sharing every facet of me. That's one approach, right? And it's not right or wrong. It's a choice. Um, Another way though is to turn to that community, that your chosen family that does accept you and that does understand you, right? And so there's lots of different ways and approaches that you can kind of pursue. Um, Another one is just breaking ties completely. So there's lots of different ways to do it, depending on kind of um, your own safety, right? That's the most important, is your safety, and your emotional well-being. And so understanding what your capacity is for these conversations, and your boundaries, and what you're able to communicate, and what you're able to kind of put up with and accept. See, how would you deal with your family that doesn't respect your partner's gender? Um, I don't like giving answers that aren't productive and helpful and practical, but it and I hate to keep saying this, but it really just depends. I think that's a conversation to have with your partner. Um, I think it's important for them to get to decide how important it is to them to stay connected to your family. Are they okay with not being connected to your family? Is it important that for you that they stay connected to your family? Um, Again, it goes back to safety. It goes back to um, intentionally creating those boundaries. Um, and so maybe if they're not using the proper pronouns for your partner, that's setting a strict boundary of, if you aren't able to use they, them pronouns, I need you to address them by their name. And so if that's easiest for you, that's what we're going to do. And so it's really just creating those boundaries and being clear about um, what that looks like. And if you feel like those boundaries you aren't able to create, if it feels like they aren't respected, then that might mean severing a relationship. That might mean, yeah, that might mean giving some space and time until those boundaries and those conversations can be had in a respectful way. Let's see here. What are some tips for handling? Okay, I'm looking at both the screen and the chat here. How do you balance your needs with expectations of family and friends during holidays? This question's multifaceted. So I think my first thought is self-care. There's naturally kind of a sense of people pleasing around the holidays and wanting to be there for family, wanting to be there for friends. Um, but it goes back to having self-care proactively planned. And so if you know, okay, I have these needs, but I also have these events that are coming up, how can I be intentional about what toys am I going to play? What fidget toys am I going to bring, right? Do I have my journal packed? When I go spend time with friends, how can I convey to them how hard it is to spend time with family, or what kind of support do I need from my friends, and being able to ask for those things in advance. Hopefully that kind of helps. I hopefully. Let's see here. What are some tips for handling questions or comments about relationships, gender identity, or pronouns at family events? I always like to ask the question why. I feel like it's very telling. Why do you have these pronouns? Oh, thanks for asking that question. I'm curious why you would like to know that, right? I'm curious why you feel like now is the time for that conversation. Um, the question why can really kind of reveal people's intentions. And sometimes the intention is genuine curiosity and a desire to understand and know more. And sometimes it's maybe not as well intentioned. And so knowing how to say, hey, you've asked this question. I'm curious to know why you've asked it. Or I'm curious to know what about this question, right? Like, what is it that why you're asking this? Um, and so I would encourage you to ask why. And I would also encourage you um, to always know that you don't have to be the source of information. You could also provide resources. You can also say, hey, you know what? I'm going to send you a great article about this. I'm going to send you a great documentary about this, so that you can learn more about this. Um, and I don't know that now is the time to talk about it. Or, maybe you're in a more intimate setting. Maybe it's a more trusted space, and you do feel like you can engage in that conversation. And so that's really for you to determine as these questions kind of come up. Um, let's see. Did I miss any? I'm just seeing Luis Rodriguez, ADHD gang. Yep, it's real. It is. Well, great. I'm not seeing any other questions come through. Um, oh, okay. What are some good gender neutral options for helping Spanish speakers talk to a non binary partner? Um, hmm. Yeah, I mean, you have like ella, right? That's a kind of they, them pronoun. Um, since culturally Spanish is Spanish is very gender based culturally. I'd be happy to look more into that. I know that I could probably put a list of resources together. And so if you could screenshot my email and email me about that. I'm also, can I actually put because this is my office email. I wonder if I can put my direct email into the chat as well. Um, and I think the hosts have it as well, but I'm going to chat that to you all here in the private chat. And so feel free to email me, and I would love to kind of get a more full list for you, more than what I can kind of come up with off the top of my head right now. Yeah, EJ, pronounce EJ. Yep, gender neutral. Yep. Um, but I'm sure there's other kind of strategies in addition to that. So I'm happy to look into that for you. Anything else? Doo-doo-doo. Yeah, happy to do that, Luis. All right. Well, thank you all so much for having me. Truly an honor to be here. And hopefully this is helpful for you and something you can add to your toolkit. I'll pass it back to the hosts.
Well, hi, folks. This is Paula, and my pronouns are she and her. And want to, thank y'all for the opportunity to be with you tonight. And you know, should kind of following what her words, which are, were so important, is now going to go from talking about how we as folks in the community do things to now a perspective of, allies and folks who want to speak up for other people in the community that may not be you. So that's where this is, when I talk about this is, the 4 L's for this Noel, some things to think about in the storm, because we are absolutely in a storm. Next slide. So I say that my 3-word bio is Navy nurse lawyer. For those of you who didn't know, is the United States Navy now has a ship named after Harvey Milk. It's the second ship in the John Lewis class of oilers. Those are replenishment ships that resupply and refuel other ships. And every ship in the class is named after a civil rights icon. And the second ship in the class is named after Harvey Milk. It's the first time in the history of the Navy intentionally named a ship after a member of the LGBTQ community. And I had the privilege of being the sponsor that broke the champagne bottle and named the ship on behalf of the Navy. Next slide. Now, as a lawyer, I'll give you the legal disclaimers. I don't own the copyright for most of the pictures. Fair use, this is a non-commercial educational offering. So they own the copyrights to the pictures. More importantly is that in talking about allyship and talking about how we are going to weather the environment we find ourselves in this holiday season and in projecting into what the new year is going to bring. If you don't like what I say, you don't blame Johns Hopkins Medicine. You don't blame the United States Navy. You don't blame anybody else that I'm affiliated with. You can say you didn't like what Paula had to say and you blame me. Next slide. Now, a couple of personal disclaimers, because when we talk about countering intentionally misrepresenting information or outright gaslighting and lies that are being told about the community, particularly about transgender and gender expansive folks, got to talk about religiosity, and I've got to talk about partisan politics. I'm a Christian. I was baptized as a Roman Catholic. I was raised in the Catholic faith. I graduated from a place called Regis High School in New York City, which is often seen as the #1 Roman Catholic high school in the United States, and I was taught theology by the Jesuits. That's also me getting my diploma when I graduated from Annapolis from Ronald Reagan. I've been a Republican, I've been a Democrat, I've been an independent, depending on what state I lived in. So when I talk about religiosity in politics, I'm not speaking from any particular partisan viewpoint or an anti-religious viewpoint. It's talking about these are what are the drivers in this environment and how do we navigate this? Next slide. So this is what I mean when I said the 4 L's of allyship. And all of us are allies to each other. We're experts in our own experience, whatever that experience is. And this is always through a lens of intersectionality, because every one of us has many dimensions about who we are. We're no one thing. No one part of us is generally all encompassing. So because you may be part of the community, particularly when we talk about transgender and gender expansive folks, if you are cisgender, you may not be supportive of transgender people. And, it's an uncomfortable truth that many of vocal folks that are championing restrictions on transgender rights are themselves part of the LGBT community. So one of the things that we all need to do is we've got to look inside. It requires a level of introspection and reflection of being able to say, what are our blind spots? What are our biases? What are we bringing to the table based on our experience, our training, our, our lives, our view of ourselves, our worldviews? What are we bringing to the conversation that maybe we need to learn a little bit more about, or we need to be aware of? What do I need to learn? And what do I feel comfortable with? You need to listen to the members of the community And for those of us that work in healthcare, it's listening to our staff members that interact with the community. It means being an active listener and hearing what's said and not just listening to react and immediately counter it. It means when people tell you that they are afraid or that they are scared or they're anxious, believe them. Do not minimize that fear. The fear, the anxiety, that level of uncertainty that many in the community have felt, particularly since the election, is very real and it is absolutely rational. Those are valid feelings. So when someone expresses that to you, don't say, oh, it's not so bad, or oh, no, it's not going to be bad. Now, that is balanced with don't be afraid of what hasn't happened yet. You want to be strategic. You want to see where the threats are coming from. Take those threats seriously. Plan accordingly. Strategize accordingly. But don't let that fear become overwhelming. And when people express that that's what they're feeling, be present with them and then learn. Being here tonight for this, for the conversations we're having tonight, being to go seek out knowledge and information from reputable sources and experts. And I'll talk about that more in a second. And then lastly, you have to lead. Of all the dimensions about me, my sexual orientation, my gender identity are as important to me as my eye color or the fact that I'm right-hand dominant, which means that they are part of who I am. Nothing to be ashamed about, but also just part of who I am. For folks who actually know me, know that my being a professional military officer and having been and considering myself still to be a warrior is way more important of how I view the world, how I interact with the world, than, like I said, my sexual orientation, my gender identity. But all of us have to then be willing to stand up. The notion of freedom isn't free, and it's scary. We talked about Harvey Milk. Harvey Milk was a big advocate of, for those of us that can come out, should come out. Because there are some folks who can't. But if you can't, do not stay in the closet simply because of fear. Make a strategic decision, because that's empowering. And for our allies, it's to support that empowerment. As you look at the environment and do a risk rewards analysis. And we do this all the time, almost organically, of where is it safe to share some information about ourselves. And we feel more comfortable sharing with some people and in some environments than not. And as an ally, it's to empower people to make that decision for themselves and then support it. One of the things about being a good, effective ally is not to inadvertently out. You think that you're rushing to someone's defense, but if they haven't shared that information, you may inadvertently out them. So be advisable about when you do this. But it is a matter of saying, here I am, and being in the line of fire. Is we don't need performative allyship, which means that you're willing to talk the talk, but you're not willing to walk the walk. Now, again, in the environment, in preparation for tonight, earlier today, the National Defense Appropriate Authorization Act passed part of the Senate to go to a full vote. It wasn't a strict party line vote. So folks that have been saying that there are allies intentionally voted for something that they know is going to harm transgender youth that are the dependents of military personnel, because that's one of the provisions that's in this bill. That's not the kind of ally you need. You need allies that will stand up and say, this is wrong, and say why, and educate people, and then be right beside the folks in the community. It means having no tolerance for willful ignorance, intentional misrepresentation, or just outright prejudice, harassment, and bigotry. We have seen in this past year, particularly during the end of the election cycle, a lot of intentional misrepresentation, a lot of demonizing of particularly transgender and gender expansive people. None of it is grounded in reality. All of it is designed to play to people's fears, to play to that unconscious bias about the other. And when folks want to make those arguments, allies need to stand up and say that is not true and be uncompromising about it. Be able to point people to the appropriate sources of information. And in doing this, I don't, mean to imply that you just need to be completely aggressive and assertive about it. You need to be strategic. Most people talk from places of ignorance and fear. So find out what they're afraid of. Find out where they're getting their information and be able to provide information. Be able to try to help guide people and educate people when you can. Another very clear point about being a leader in this is being able to identify those who do not want to come at this with an open mind. You have to be able to identify those who are just blinded by their own prejudices, that they are not going to have a rational conversation. And the conversation right now is not grounded in rationality. It is grounded in white nationalism, which in the United States turns into Christian fundamentalist religiosity and partisan politics. Is when you are dealing with folks that do not want to come at this with an open mind, don't waste your time trying to explain stuff to them. Rather, spend your time and energy on those folks that are unsure, that are seeking information, and try to educate them and influence them. And lastly, every ally has their own sphere of influence. Some of us have a bigger megaphone. Get asked to do public speaking, get asked to comment in the media. Most people don't. But you still have your circle of friends. You still have your coworkers. You still have all of the different organizations and people that you interact with that you can influence. And having those conversations with them is just as important for those folks that you may see on TV that have a bigger platform. And often this is a matter of having conversations with folks to really find out where they're coming from. And then again, be able to educate them and help guide them. The next slide. So I mentioned about being able to distinguish between reputable sources of information and non-reputable sources of information. The organizations that are listed on this slide have been identified by the Southern Poverty Law Center, which is an organization that tracks hate groups in the United States, for being anti-LGBTQ plus hate groups, because they intentionally disseminate false propaganda and lies about LGBTQ plus people. You can see that some of these organizations chose names that can then, for the average layperson, may confuse with an actual professional organization like the American College of Pediatricians, trying to confuse people with the American Academy of Pediatrics, which, by the way, fully supports transgender kids and transgender healthcare. Many of these associations identify themselves as so-called Christian organizations. And you'll notice that I use the term religiosity and not religion, because there is nothing in the Christian religion that justifies hatred. But in people's religiosity, their interpretation of what the beliefs are supposed to be often leads them down this path. And these are the organizations that are being used to provide so-called pseudoscientific support, and it's actually pseudoscience, to propel these arguments, like the one that was made at the Supreme Court to justify Tennessee's ban on allowing transgender kids to access medically necessary evidence-based care. Next slide. Now, to learn more about this, and there's been very good investigative reporting, and you can get into the background and and to see how much of what you're seeing is interrelated, and it's part of it is not a happenstance. It is part of a planned um, attack on the community with the intent of trying to drive LGBTQ people out of the social space, to try to drive people back into the closet, to refuse to acknowledge that particularly transgender folks exist, that we're real. So the Movement Advancement Project has a whole Under Fire series. It's a series of reports. And then the Southern Poverty Law Center Project Captain, combating anti-LGBTQ pseudoscience through accessible informative narrative, will let you know what these arguments are, who's making them, who's funding them, and how they're interrelated. Now, I know that that sounds pretty tough-minded and, pretty forceful and somewhat bleak when I say that we're in a storm, we're under attack. Absolutely valid. But I want to leave you with something uh, more positive about what do we do in this environment. So next slide. So talk about community. Today happens to be December 17th. Yesterday was the 80th anniversary of the beginning of the Battle of the Bulge. For those of you that are history buffs or had seen the TV series Band of Brothers. The Battle of the Bulge was the Germans' last offensive on the Western Front in World War II. It was the last gasp of the Nazis and fascists trying to fight the Western Allies. And their initial attack was an onslaught. They overwhelmed the frontline troops. There was a lot of panic. There was a lot of fear. There was a lot of uncertainty. Sounds kind of familiar with what's going on now, 80 years later. But while there was that panic, there was that fear, the soldiers that were in that area realized that they were still a community. They were still together. They were there for each other. And that camaraderie, that common bond of looking out for each other gave them the defiant resilience to stand up to that onslaught. When Bastogne, which was one of the towns, was completely surrounded, the Germans asked the commander to surrender. And his reply was nuts. Absolute defiance and resoluteness, saying that I am not going to surrender. You want me to be intimidated. You want me to be afraid. You want me to give in, and I'm not going to do it. Well, folks, it's time for us to tap into that strain of our history. The documentary that was made about the characters that were in the Band of Brothers was titled We Stand Alone Together. And I think that's apt for us today as we're going to get through this holiday season. And then it's, what's going to happen is, as long as we look out for each other, as long as we stay resolute, we take care of ourselves, we take care of each other, and we don't surrender, we are going to get through this, and eventually we are going to prevail. I can't tell you how long that's going to be. There are going to be casualties. Hate to be the bearer of bad news, but that's a reality, and that's a very, very tough reality to be able to understand. But that's where we're at. I see, the question about how do you decide if it's worth it or safe to push back against bigots? That's, that again is an individual decision that you have to make. You have to be able to weigh the risk and rewards. For me, I'm 61. When I was 18 years old and I was inducted into the Naval Academy, I swore an oath. I swore that I would defend the Constitution. And in making that oath, I understood that there were going to be people that wanted to hurt me, to kill me, because I was standing up for those values. And at 61, nothing's changed. So for me is, I'm not naive about my safety. I, check around my environment. I don't do things to invite attacks. But I'm also absolutely resolute in my mindset that if that attack comes, I am going to defend myself. I may lose, but I'm going to go down fighting. And I realize that that statement comes from a position of privilege. It comes from a position of I have unique lived experience, unique training. Uh, there are more transgender people in the United States than there are Naval Academy graduates. Uh, so for me, I've gone through that thought process, and I've made my decisions of what's going to be my courses of action. And each one of us needs to do that same thing. And you're the only one that can make that decision for yourself. See, another question is, when a loved one comes out, what are the good ways to support them? Is let them lead that process. And let them know that you are there in support of them. Is just that mere presence, just that mere word of I see you. And particularly if you may not understand something, it is okay to say, I don't understand, but my understanding is not as important as me supporting you. And have your actions back up the words. It's easy to say the words, but then you have to be willing to walk the walk. And that comes with risks to yourself. If you speak up for someone in the community and you're not in the community, people are going to assume that you're in the community. Excuse me. It may cost you relationships with your family and your friends if you speak up in support of a family member that's come out. That's got to be part of the price that you're willing to pay to be an ally. But then let them lead in how to best support them. And asking somebody, hey, how can I best support you? What do you need? Is a way to start that conversation. And I'm just taking a look through the chat, or if there were other questions that had come in. Is I'm gonna type my my email in the chat so that you be shared with y'all in case anybody has any questions or wants to reach out. And with that, I think if there aren't any other questions, then I guess the next slide. Oh, good point is that if you can't change the mind of the person you're talking to, you can still change the mind of the others who are listening. One other thing I comment about that, just because it came in from Instagram and stuff, is that when you see posts on social media talking about topics related to the community, do not read the comments. That's an act of self-care. Online comments are not the place to be getting into nuanced conversations. That's not the forum for that. And in a world where you have intentionally bad actors who use the anonymity of the internet, the keyboard cowards, it takes an emotional toll. So one of the things that we tell, particularly the younger folks, uh, is, don't read the comments about it because you're going to be exposed to all kinds of hate, and it's generally not worth it. And you're not going to change their minds in that forum, in those kind of conversations. Yeah. Another question, how do you deal with people, who think they mean well but are still hurtful? Tell them. It's, hey, you know, without getting into the details about a microaggression, that's what it is, because it doesn't matter what their intent was. What matters is what the impact was. And to explain to someone, hey, I get that you didn't, you meant well, but here's how this landed. And here's what you really want to be thinking about before you do this again. And again, you can do it in a non-confrontational, non-adversarial, I'm going to rip your head off because you screwed something up. But it's like, hey, let's walk through this and let me see if I can get you to see this a little bit differently about how, yes, may have had a good intent, an F on the execution there, and then here's what you want to be thinking about before you do it again. And and I think if you come at it authentically, if you come at it openly and wanting to be helpful and educational and looking for common ground, that is always going to be better than just being completely, um, adversarial or walking around with a chip on your shoulder. Is where you have to make the balances. Finding out is when you're not going to be able to be educational, and when some people just do need to get cut off at the knees. And again, that's always a dynamic calculus. Uh, I said, I'm going to go ahead and type in my contact information. I do want to wish everybody, the happiest of holidays, and really hope that everyone and with your loved ones, whether it's family, friends, whoever is important to you in your life, that you can spend it in, a safe, relaxing, peaceful environment, and that the new year does bring good for you, and that notion that whatever comes in the new year, we're all going to do this together, because we can be fearful together or we can be courageous together. And courage does not mean the absence of fear. Courage means I'm afraid, but I'm still going to move forward. And, you know, we can do that together. So thank you very much, and happy holidays, everybody.
Hi, everyone. My name is Tommy Zai. I'm a member of the Howard County LGBTQIA Commission. We'd like to sincerely thank both Paula Nira and Shekinah Davis. Thank you again so much for joining us today. Amazing insights. Love the actionable information and ways that we can support each other and look out for ourselves during the holiday season and beyond. Sincerely, thank you very much on behalf of the Commission and the Howard County Office of Human Rights and Equity. Paul, there's your contact info there in the chat for everybody as well. Everyone in the chat and everyone watching, including those of you watching this later in the future on YouTube or other platforms, thank you again so much for taking the time out of your day to watch this presentation. If you would like to learn more about the LGBTQI Commission, you can head on over to howardcountymd.gov/boards-commissions, or just Google Howard County Commissions. You'll find us there. You can also reach out to the Office of Human Rights and Equity on social media, on Facebook, Instagram, and more. Oh, and thank you. More info there in the chat on our commission. We've got a lot of events coming up this coming year, and more ways that we can support each other and ourselves and get through this storm together. All right. Thank you, everyone. I hope you have a wonderful night and happy holidays.